Hi, welcome to my food science lab today. And that's what I want to discuss, what it would be like to be a food scientist. Actually, every day we enter the kitchen, we're a food scientist because what they try to do is continually create foods that will be better for us, that are healthier and taste better so that we'll want to be healthy and eat well. And one way that the food scientists use to do this is measure very carefully. So whenever there's going to be a recipe that you want to try out, first you start by carefully in your diary recording the foods you're going to use, determine the amounts you're going to try to use, and then you keep track of how carefully you measured each ingredient when it's done. If it's a little bit bland, you might want to amp up the flavor ingredients a little more next time. Or if it's too spicy, amp them down. So today, what I'm going to make for you is a simple banana bread, but a gluten-free banana bread that's real popular right now. So this is a simple muffin recipe, and it uses lots of dry ingredients, which we'll combine in one and then mix them. And then you put wet ingredients in another container, and then you put the really messy ones in the middle, mix them first, and then carefully fold them in to the other wet ingredients. So my dry ingredients today are going to include a cup of oats, a cup of almond flour, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, and 1 teaspoon of baking soda. If I needed 3, then I'd use a tablespoon because 3 of these equals 1 tablespoon. Then I'll prepare the wet ingredients. You get your dry ingredients ready and mixed first. Then I'll mix the wet ingredients because I can tell by how much dry ingredients I have, I don't want more than half of the other ingredients to be wet because then it'll be too mushy. So we'll start with applesauce, honey, a little oil, and mix that well. Then I'll use a whisk for 2 eggs and fold them into the other wet ingredients. And finally, I'll mash up 2 very ripe bananas in that bowl and put them in the wet ingredients too. At that point, I mix all the wet ingredients into the dry, and then I can gauge how moist it is because I've done it before. I'm anxious to show you what I've been able to do to get us ready to make muffins. So far, I have combined the dry ingredients, and I'm combining them with a wooden spoon. And this is, again, 1 cup of oats, 1 cup of almond flour, 1 teaspoon, and this is a cup each, and 1 teaspoon of baking soda and baking powder, trying to keep it very simply ingrediented. And those are mixed now. Then over here, I have used my wire whisk to mix up 1/2 a cup of applesauce, 1/2 a cup of milk, 1/2 a cup of honey, and 2 tablespoons of oil. And then I use my wire whisk. Oh, this is one of my favorite tools. You can use this making any kind of eggs or other ingredients that fold in because it's a good folding tool. So we get those ready, and I also used a large fork to mix up my mashed bananas. So they're ready to fold into this mixture. And we'll combine the 2 of them then. All right. There we go. All right. Now let's see how this looks. We're getting it ready to fold in. It doesn't have to be totally liquid or combined because muffins like to absorb the other ingredients around them as they cook. They're not fussy and they're so tasty. All right, here we go. Let's see how this looks. combination of my wooden spoon and my whisk just to mix it gently. And then try to show you the consistency we have, because remember we're going to put this in a muffin tin. And sometimes the ingredients look really wet at first, but then if they sit for a few minutes before they go in the oven, they thicken up. That would be the case now because almond flour is very thick and it tends to absorb the liquid around it the longer it sits. So these are just things you can try different amounts. Now to me, this looks too moist. The way that I would adapt this and mark it in my diary over here before I cook it, if I'm thinking, oh, I don't want them to be too runny, these muffins, then I used a cup of each thing. I used a half a cup of each wet ingredient. And if I wanted to add just a little more of each, I'd use a quarter of a cup, because then I could record that easily and know the difference to add. And what I'm going to do right now, look at this, it's sitting. I'm going to add a quarter cup more of oats. Again, I don't want to add more, and that's an even flat quarter of a cup. And we'll whisk that in, or spoon it in, fold it is that term that the food scientists would use. And that gives me just a little bit firmer texture to this, that it doesn't feel so liquid. But what happens to these things in the oven is fun to watch. By turning the oven light on after 5 minutes, and after 10 minutes, and then after 15 minutes, you can see a very clear difference. After 5 minutes, they'll be flat and shiny. After 10 minutes, they're beginning to bowl up a little bit. And at the end of 15 minutes, they'll be browned and they should be tall. So, I think this is ready to give that a try and see if it works. Let's fold in my cup of chocolate chips. I'm going to use chocolate chips with banana. If I use zucchini or pumpkin, then I'd use raisins instead. And you can use nuts if you're not allergic to them. Whatever you enjoy putting in your muffins always makes them better to eat. Oh, blueberries too. Those are great. All right, well, I'm all ready. So I can't wait to try them, and I hope yours come out really well too. See you next time.